He smiled the way he always smiled when he thought he had control of a room, that particular expression people develop when they have been performing confidence for so long they forget it is a performance. The conference room was full, maybe 15 people, all of them watching him with the kind of attention that comes from wanting to believe in something before they have fully committed to it. Investors, mostly, along with a few potential partners he had been courting for months. He was standing at the head of the table doing what he did best, which was talking with absolute certainty about projections and growth metrics and market positioning. And then he looked at me, almost casually, and said with that same easy smile, "And this is Sarah Chen, my assistant." I did not correct him, did not interrupt. I just gave a small nod, pulled out the chair at the side of the table where assistants apparently sit, and settled in quietly like I always did. Because I knew something he did not know. In less than 10 minutes, none of this would belong to him anymore. Not the company, not the narrative, not the room full of people currently hanging on his words. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 years ago Marcus Hayes had nothing. No money, no backing, no real plan beyond what he called a vision, but what was actually just an idea that sounded good when he said it out loud after 2 drinks. What he had was confidence, the kind that makes people believe before they ask questions. And he had me. I was there when that idea was nothing but messy notes and late-night voice messages. I built the pitch decks from scratch, spending hours making sure the design did not look amateurish and the content actually supported the claims we were making. I fixed the financial models when his numbers did not add up, which was often. I rewrote the business strategy more times than I can count, adjusting for feedback, adapting to market research I had conducted myself. And every time we walked into a meeting with someone who could potentially fund us, he spoke and I stayed silent. That was the arrangement, though it had never been discussed or formalized. It just happened naturally the first few times, and then became the pattern. And patterns become expectations, and expectations become the reality you live in if you do not actively push back against them. At first, I told myself it did not matter. That once things took off, once we got real funding, he would acknowledge my role properly, that this was temporary. But temporary has a way of turning permanent when you do not stop it early. Meeting after meeting, introduction after introduction, I became smaller in the story Marcus was telling about how this company came to exist. At first, I was his co-founder, though he would add the qualifier junior in a way that made it sound like I had joined something he had already started. Then I became his first hire. Then I was part of the core team, mentioned in passing along with people who had joined months after me. Until one day, at a meeting with a venture capital firm we had been trying to get in front of for months, someone asked him directly who handled the financial modeling that they had found surprisingly sophisticated for an early-stage company. Marcus did not even hesitate. He laughed, that easy, confident laugh, looked straight at me where I was sitting 2 chairs down taking notes, and said, "Oh, Sarah just helps here and there." Just helps, here and there. Something about the way he said it, so casual and dismissive, that was the moment it stopped being about patience or strategy. That was the moment I understood that Marcus genuinely believed the story he was telling, that in my mind I actually was just someone who helped here and there, while he built something remarkable. I did not argue with him in that meeting. Did not correct the record or clarify my actual role, because reacting emotionally would have only made me easier to ignore. So instead, I started paying attention differently, started treating this less like a partnership and more like a situation where I needed to protect myself from someone who had decided I was not important enough to credit accurately. I kept records. Every version of every document we created, with timestamps that showed when I had created the initial draft and when Marcus had made his minimal edits. Every email chain where I had proposed an idea that later became something he described as his insight. Every piece of financial analysis, every market research report, every strategic framework I had built from scratch. And quietly, without telling Marcus, I started reaching out to investors on my own. Not the ones we were actively pitching, but to other firms, other individuals who operated in adjacent spaces and might be interested in what we were building if it was presented correctly. Most did not reply. Some sent polite rejections, but a few, the ones who actually looked closely at what I was showing them, started noticing things. They noticed that the financial projections Marcus presented didn't quite hold up under detailed examination. They noticed that when they asked specific technical questions, Marcus could speak to the high-level vision, but struggled with the mechanics. But when they talked to me, my answers had depth. I could walk them through the logic, show them the data that supported our assumptions, explain not just what we were doing, but why it would work and what the risks were. And slowly, very quietly, conversations started shifting. The same people who had once only spoken to Marcus started asking questions that were clearly meant for me, started requesting follow-up meetings where they wanted me in the room specifically. Marcus did not notice at first. That was the best part. He was too busy enjoying the attention to pay attention to the fact that the people he was performing for were losing interest in his version of the story. Then came the meeting he had been preparing for like it would change everything. A major venture firm had agreed to sit down with us after months of Marcus pursuing them. This was the meeting that would either secure enough funding to actually build what we had been promising or force us to shut down. The conference room was full in a way that made the stakes feel real. You could feel the tension, the anticipation, the kind of energy that makes people sit a little straighter. Marcus stood at the head of the table, looking more confident than I had seen him in months. He launched into the presentation, walking them through slides I had built, explaining projections I had calculated, describing a strategy I had developed over dozens of iterations. My work, again, presented as our work in a way that positioned him as the architect and me as someone who had helped execute his vision. I sat where I always sat, off to the side, and I waited. 10 minutes in, one of the investors stopped Marcus mid-sentence, a woman named Jennifer Aldrich who had a reputation for asking uncomfortable questions. She leaned forward and asked, in a tone that was polite but direct, who had actually built the financial projections they were looking at. Marcus smiled, that same easy smile. He gestured toward me without even turning to look at me fully and said, "Sarah's my assistant. She helps with that kind of thing." That word again, assistant. The room did not react immediately, but I watched Jennifer's expression change, watched her lean back and study Marcus in a way that felt different. "That's interesting," she said, her voice neutral in the way that suggests the opposite, a pause that felt deliberate. "Because we've already reviewed the original financial model." Another pause, long enough for Marcus to start understanding that something was wrong. "And it wasn't sent by you." I watched it happen in real time, that moment when confidence cracks, when someone realizes they are standing on ground that is not as solid as they thought. Marcus tried to recover, opened his mouth to say something, but before he could, another voice cut in. David Chen, the senior partner. "We've made a decision." The room went completely still. "We're moving forward with this company. The fundamentals are strong, but we're not doing it with you." He was looking at Marcus when he said it. Direct eye contact, no ambiguity. Marcus just stood there, frozen. "Sarah already has our term sheet," David continued, now looking at me. "We sent it to her 3 days ago. She's been building this company. The work is hers. And we'd like to keep working with her, with a new structure that reflects that reality." No one was looking at Marcus anymore. All the attention in the room had shifted, quietly and naturally, until it was entirely focused on me. I did not smile, did not gloat. I just met Marcus's eyes for a second, watched him understand fully that the story he had been telling about himself had just been publicly corrected by people whose opinion he cared about more than mine. For the first time since I had known him, he did not have control of the room, or the narrative. He had called me his assistant for so long that it had almost become true in his mind, and I had let him. Not because I agreed, but because correcting him earlier would have only changed what he said in meetings. It would not have changed how he thought about me or what he believed he deserved credit for. Waiting, building the alternative quietly while he performed loudly, making sure that when the correction came, it came from people he could not dismiss, that changed everything else. The conference room ended shortly after that. The investors stayed to talk details with me while Marcus gathered his things and left without saying anything. I found out later he started telling people I had betrayed him, that I had stolen his company. He was not entirely wrong. I did take it, but it had been mine all along. I just had to wait until everyone else figured that out.